most violent, unstable societies throughout history have one thing in common: the disproportionate number of young men with a lack of economic or romantic opportunities. When a boy loses a male role model, he is more likely to be incarcerated than graduate from college.
Wow.
I worry that we're going to have millions of young people who at the middle and the later stages of their life wake up and go, I never really felt real victory.
Scott Galloway is a serial entrepreneur and best-selling author. He's here to talk about how young men's brains are being hijacked by technology, false intimacy, and economic insecurity, and why we should all be very concerned.
You have so many men spending so much time online that men aged 20 to 30 are spending less time outdoors than prison inmates.
Oh, that's terrifying.
2/3 now of people under the age of 18 are now in a synthetic relationship. They have a godlike technology telling them they can have a reasonable facsimile of life online.
It's a partner with no needs.
My AI girlfriend will tell me I'm sexy, and no one's ever going to tell me to get my shit together.
You're not learning to say, it's my turn to be loving.
Every wonderful thing in my life was preceded by dozens, if not hundreds, of no's.
What does it mean to connect when they're ready?
If I could communicate anything to young men, when you're not achieving, building, procreating, feeling sadness, feeling joy with someone else, it's literally like it doesn't happen. I worry that we're evolving this asocial, asexual species.
Hi, I'm Mayim Bialik.
And I'm Jonathan Cohen.
Welcome to our breakdown. There is a crisis in America, and it revolves around the needs of not just men, but women as well. The statistics regarding what we're going to talk about today constitute a 5-alarm fire. What we're going to talk about today touches pretty much every aspect of the human experience, from rates of success in relationships to economic success, including rates of suicide. What one issue could encompass all of these things? What one issue could be so impacted by the rise in AI, the rise in synthetic relationships? Guess what? It's being male. Scott Galloway is going to join us to talk about notes on being a man. Scott Galloway, also known as Prof G, is a serial entrepreneur and best-selling author. He's here to talk about how young men's brains are being hijacked by technology, false intimacy, and economic insecurity, and why we should all be very concerned. We've spoken to Scott before. We spoke to him about the algebra of wealth, which was an analysis of how economics and socioeconomics are impacting all of us. But today we're going to be focusing on being a man.
Scott is probably the busiest man in podcasting with his show Pivot with Kara Swisher, as well as Raging Moderates, which is his political show, and Prof G Media, where I think he has like 10 shows a day. It's really unbelievable. We're really, really excited to get to speak with Scott. Again?
And with that, Scott Galloway, welcome back to The Breakdown.
Break it down.
It's good to be with you.
We appreciate you taking time away also from your Oprah schedule. We were very, very impressed. And
we're tight now. Me and Oprah are just best buddies.
As you should be. But we were particularly moved, by the way that you're framing this conversation with notes on being a man and, what you kind of describe as like a 5-alarm fire for men in this country. Can you kind of frame for us what you see happening, and also, why should we all be concerned about what we see happening for men?
Sure, and thanks. That's a generous question. I would probably, the focus of my work has mostly been about the struggles of young men. So let me just first do my land acknowledgement and say that, look, men of my age registered unprecedented, unfair advantage. From 1945 to 2000, America garnered a third of the world's economic growth with 5% of the population. So we had 6 times the economic prosperity of the average global citizen, and almost all of that prosperity was crammed into 1/3 of the American population that was white, heterosexual, and male. So I want to be clear. I've had gale force wins in my sales since I was born in the 60s. The issue is, should young men be paying the price for my disproportionate unearned advantage? Because if you look at the stats, they're pretty stark. If you go into a morgue and there's 5 people who've died by suicide, 4 are men. And we now have only 1 in 3 men are in a relationship under the age of 30. It's 2 in 3 women because women are dating older. When we passed Title IX to level up women and provide the opportunity for upward mobility via college, it was 60-40 male to female. Now it's 40-60. It may go 2 to 1 in the next 5 years in terms of graduates because men drop out at a greater rate. You now, 1 in 7 men in America are what are referred to as NEETs, and that is they're neither in education, employment, or even training. 62% of men aren't even trying to date under the age of 30. And you have so many men spending so much time online that the most recent survey shows that men age 20 to 30 are spending less time outdoors than prison inmates. So you wrap that all in the notion that America's kind of become this giant bet on AI or 10 companies. And those 10 companies do a lot of things, but I would argue their primary means of building shareholder value is to sequester us from our relationships and work and school and get us to spend another minute every day on our phones. And a young man's prefrontal cortex, which is quite frankly just less mature, is especially receptive to that kind of dopa hit. So I feel as if we've attached our economy to the notion of evolving a new species of asocial, asexual males. And why do we care? Well, the most violent, unstable societies throughout history have one thing in common, and that is a disproportionate number of young men with a lack of economic or romantic opportunities. And women nor the country are going to continue to flourish if men are flailing. So, young men are my biggest fans, but my biggest supporters are mothers who tend to have both boys and girls because they see the difference, and the difference is stark. But I think this is something that affects all of us.
I mean, many women I know have started dating women.
Is that right? Yeah.
And there's many reasons for that. But when I sort of, look at that stat right up against 62% of men, right, under 30 not trying to date, what's happening? What are they doing? I mean, I have a 20-year-old and I have a 17-year-old, and Jonathan has a 17-year-old. So we're in Boys Town here, but there's something that's happening between 20 and 30, I think, that we'd love your assistance with. Like, it used to be the thing to do. I mean, it also used to be the thing to do to get a driver's license to get the hell out of your house. Now my children just want to watch me cook dinner while they scroll on their phones. Something is changing, but what's changing more disproportionately for men, that they do not have a desire to pursue the opposite sex or the same sex, any kind of dating?
Well, so it's multidimensional, but the first is just purely biological, and that is men mature later. And what's weird is it appears that the gap in maturity is actually broadening. So a boy's prefrontal cortex is 18 months behind a girl's. So two seniors in high school applying to college, the girl is basically competing against a 10th grade girl. 7 in 10 high school valedictorians are girls. At NYU, I can tell you in some graduate schools, if we were totally admissions blind, it would not only be 70% female or 80% female, it'd be 50% Asian female, because the Asian community has done such an outstanding job of preparing their kids for school. But look at K through 12. And I've said this to some pushback. I think it's bias against boys. Look at the behaviors we promote or encourage in primary school. Sit still, be a pleaser, be organized, raise your hand.
Mm-hmm.
You just described a girl. And boys have better gross motor skills. They're faster and stronger. Girls have greater fine motor skills. Their hands, their oral skills, asking questions. What do we ask kids to do in school? We ask them to push a pencil and ask and answer questions. But the biggest means a variety of things. A lot of the on-ramps to economic viability for a boy that doesn't go to college have been eliminated. We've outsourced a lot of our manufacturing. Remember wood, auto, and metal shop? Those have gone away. We're all hoping that our kid learns Mandarin and takes computer science and ends up at Google. And 2/3 of our kids do not end up with traditional liberal arts college degrees. And this has been especially hard on young men. In addition, the digitization of the mating market. Whenever you digitize a market, it becomes a winner-take-most environment. So you digitize retail, and 50% of all e-commerce goes to Amazon. You digitize connections and information, and 2/3 and 90% of all connections or online connections and search goes to Meta and Alphabet, respectively. When you digitize the mating market, people used to meet through friends, through work, and through school. Now they primarily meet online. When you digitize the mating market, you end up in the following environment: 50 men on Tinder, 50 women. 46 of the women will show all of their attention to the same 4 men, which leaves 46 men fighting over 4 women. This discourages men, and unfortunately, they have a very seductive, godlike technology telling them they can have a reasonable facsimile of life online. Why go through the effort of having friends when you have Discord and Reddit? Why put on a tie and try and get a job when you can make money trading crypto or stocks on Robinhood or Coinbase? And why would you go through the effort of looking good, smelling nice, the expense, the resilience, the potential rejection, maybe risking being that guy or creeping somebody out when you see everything on? I mean, there was just a survey done online of what are the things women like least about going out in quote unquote singles environments. And on the same list in the top 5 were men never approach me. And also on the same list, creeps approach me. So as a dude, like, how do you interpret that?
That was my experience as a human being.
There are 3 women in the studio all nodding.
Yeah.
To which part? Men don't approach me or creeps approach me?
Both.
Because here's the problem. Creep is based on the perceived attractiveness of the person making the approach. Brad Pitt has never been accused of being creepy.
Eliza Schlesinger says it's only sexual harassment if he's not attractive and you're not into him.
HR hates to hear this. 1/3 of relationships begin at work. And by the way, 99% of those are consensual. I've been to 12 weddings with people who were at my work, and I'm like, I had no idea they were sleeping together. And you know what? It's a mitzvah. And the vast majority of people, even when it doesn't work out, figure it out. And if you don't know the difference between harassing someone and expressing interest and asking them out for coffee, you have bigger problems. So there's sociological problems, there's economic issues, there's mixed messaging from quote unquote the market. And also, I think there's a whole, unfortunately, I hate the incel movement, because what I coach young men, I say, I think the majority of people who would self-categorize themselves as incel are V-cells, and that is they're voluntarily celibate. And what I say to them is the following. I hate the term incel. When I was in high school and I went through puberty, I thought, I just want more than anything, I want a girlfriend. I thought I'd be such a good boyfriend. And also, I was starting to get really horny, quite frankly. And I thought, gosh, I'd really like to be physical with a willing partner, right? That would be really nice for me. And it didn't happen. I wasn't. And so what I did was I worked on myself. I worked out. I tried to get into clothes. I made female friends. I thought if I'm around women, I'll feel safer and I'll start to figure it out. I went to UCLA, and then I was a late bloomer. I didn't have a girlfriend until I was 19. But what I say to these young men is bullshit. You're voluntarily celibate. You're going to work on yourself. And if you really want to be in a relationship with a woman, a romantic and a physical relationship, you need to demonstrate excellence. You need to work on yourself. You need to have a plan. You need to have a kindness practice. And there are a lot of women out there that are not your enemy. They're on your side, and they would like to find a nice guy who notices their life, who makes an effort, who maybe texts and follows up. I mean, so I hate the term incel. I think it's a cop-out. And I think, unfortunately, online, these communities have risen up that says, give up and start blaming immigrants for your economic problems and start blaming women for your romantic problems. So, I mean, just getting to solutions, the first solution is young men need to level up. Yeah, it's harder for you than it was for me. I'll give you that for a lot of reasons. But you still have agency in the marketplace, in the corporate world, and in the mating market. The bar might be a little bit higher, but you can get there. And don't just pull the plug and say, oh, I'm an incel. That is giving up. It's bullshit.
Mind Be Alex Breakdown is supported by Superpower. You know, when I started this journey called perimenopause, something that we've talked about a lot here on the podcast, I had so many doctor's appointments to try and pinpoint why things weren't feeling right in my body. But instead of answers, we're often told everything's normal, or you're just stressed, or this is what getting older feels like. No hormone testing, no real data, no plan. That's what happens for so many of us, and it's very frustrating. But we're here to tell you that Superpower is a completely different experience. experience, changing the game for women's health. Superpower sends a licensed professional to your home, or you can visit a nearby lab, one simple blood draw with over 100 biomarkers, including detailed hormone testing, so women can actually see what's changing in their bodies instead of just guessing. This is especially powerful for women navigating perimenopause, menopause, trying to decide if hormone replacement therapy is right for you. The app breaks down insights into female hormones, thyroid health, metabolism, nutrient deficiencies, inflammation, even your true biological age, so you can see how your body's actually functioning and track improvement over time. It's incredibly empowering to finally have Superpower's actionable health plan based on real results, not assumptions, from targeted supplement recommendations, nutrition guidance that supports hormones and energy, lifestyle, and behavioral adjustments designed for women's biology. Superpower doesn't just give you a one-time snapshot. No. It tracks your results as your body changes, each test building on the last. Superpower used to cost $499, but right now it's $199 for the full experience. That's more affordable than anything else out there. Know your numbers this year with Superpower. Make this the year you stop guessing about your health with Superpower. Not only did Superpower reduce their price to just $199, but for a limited time, our listeners get an additional $20 off with code BREAK. Head to superpower.com, use the code BREAK at checkout for $20 off your membership. After you sign up, they'll ask how you heard about them. Make sure to mention this podcast to support the show.
I want to unpack an assumption that's inherent in something that was said earlier, which is that it's not all about looks, that when you talked about going to have female friends, the creepy factor of people approaching requires some social skills that you may not have as a young person, and that you need to be around other people to figure it out. You talk a lot about humor. You talk a lot about also being nice, and that it isn't about negging and creating a persona that, you know, is something other than who you are, right? If you're not a 10 out of 10 looks-wise, that doesn't mean that you're not going to be able to find someone who is also, that you find attractive and that you have a good connection with.
There's a lot of research on sexual attraction, and there are all the studies they're in different order, but they all point to the same three things of why a woman finds a man sexually attractive. The first is, and we don't like to talk about it, but it's true, it's signaling resources. And okay, so you show up with a Range Rover and a Panerai, women like that. And that's the bad news. The good news is it's signaling. In other words, you don't need to have that now, but if you have your act together, if you're the guy that says, I got to leave, I got to be up in the morning, I got things going on, you're responsible. Women don't like it's not that women like big muscles. What they like is it indicates you're competent and you can show up and you're disciplined. If you're broke, but you're at MIT and you're figuring out algorithms for hedge funds and you're responsible and nice and can show up with a clean shirt, you're signaling future resources. This guy has his act together. I was in ZBT, which was kind of the Jewish fraternity at UCLA. And I remembered, this is anecdotal, but I thought it was pretty telling. We had something called Little Sister Rush, where women would show up and say, I want to hang out with these guys. And I remember the Little Sister chairman showing me the list of all the women who showed up for Little Sister Rush. And a disproportionate number of women were seniors versus freshmen. And I'm like, I don't get it. Why do the young women not like us and the seniors do? And it goes, because we're Jews. And the freshmen are going for the water polo players. And by the time they're seniors, they want doctors and lawyers. And that is from the age of 18. And I'm going to get a ton of shit in your comments, but from the age of 18 to 22, women start connecting the dots around resources and the importance in a capitalist economy. So first thing, signaling resources. Number two, intellect. It's instinctual. People who make good decisions for the tribe is more likely to survive. The fastest way to communicate intellect is humor. And I say this jokingly, but I think it's kind of spot on. This is my impersonation of a woman. I'm laughing, I'm naked. If you can make a woman laugh, she will have every date I had under the age of 30 was someone I could make laugh, full stop. You can't just say, oh, I'm going to be funny. Sense of humor is something some people just don't have it, but you can laugh out loud. You can have a good sense of humor yourself. That's number two, intellect. Number three, and this is the secret weapon in mating that guys typically don't recognize how powerful it is. It's kindness. Women instinctively believe that at some point during their life, they will gestate and be very vulnerable, and they are smaller generally than men. So they want a person who, when they are vulnerable, will be kind. And what I tell men is, okay, there's a difference between being really nice to a woman, hoping that she'll have sex with you, and being demonstrably kind. You have good manners, you open doors for people. And also, what I point out is, I wasn't a kind person innately. I had to develop that gene or that. And I'm like, you need a kindness practice. Every day, you need to do things for other people without any reciprocal expectation, pure kindness until it becomes muscle memory. Because women will notice. They will notice the dude with good manners who is good to other people, who is patient, who, when he gets cut off in traffic, doesn't feel a need to speed up and honk and restore the universe to its natural place, that you are a kind person. So these are, there's a ton of research. These are the three things that women typically find most attractive in a potential mate.
I don't know, those of us who always dated like, loner artists who were unemployed.
Well, that's a form of intelligence. Storytellers, Mick Jagger gets to sleep with a 28-year-old ballerina because storytelling is very important to the species. If you can't draw on cave walls and make sure that people know when to plant crops and inherit knowledge, that's our advantage as a species. So storytellers, whether it's artists or musicians, get a disproportionate amount of mating opportunities.
Yeah, it's a little, you have to understand, like, for me, I think it's gross when grown men have sex with women who could be their granddaughters or great-granddaughters. I don't see it as a sign of success.
I agree with you. I'm just saying that there's a reason why Mick Jagger gets to do that.
Well, I think developing social skills, there's probably the biggest hindrance towards that ever created, and it's being scaled, which is the relationship with synthetic friends. That is maybe the biggest risk to people developing social skills.
Yeah, we just spoke to Mustafa Suleiman. He said the number one usage of AI is not the customer service, which I keep complaining about, and that I can't report that they forgot my tofu in my lunch. It's people using friends, therapists, partners through AI. We're outsourcing those kind of intimate, relationships. And I was very surprised that is apparently the most common use of AI across the world.
Yeah, it's therapy. Yeah, I know, Mustafa. Look, I think the biggest threat of AI is not that it decides we're sentient and kills us, or self-repairing weapons. There'll be income inequality, but we continue to vote for that every year. That's a decision we've all made, which I think is the wrong decision, but to blame it on AI is ridiculous. The biggest threat of AI, in my view, is loneliness. And that is, and you said this, I think synthetic relationships are a disaster. And I think we should outlaw synthetic relationships for anyone under the age of 18. I also think we need to get more serious about restricting and age-gating porn, because I think you're going to see slowly but surely fewer young men out in the wild because they would rather confine, hang out, talk to, have erotic experiences with synthetic AI characters. And supposedly 2/3 now of people under the age of 18 are now in a synthetic relationship on some level with someone, asking for advice. And it starts innocuous. Hey, I'm thinking about applying to colleges. This is who I am. Where should I apply? Those are typically the conversations you have with your friends and your parents.
Right. That's what I keep saying. I'm like, I have friends saying, oh, here's what AI told me to do to break up with this loser. And I was like, I could tell you what to say to break up with the loser too. Right. Like, we're not having those relational kind of conversations anymore. But what is going on? Like, this did not occur to me. I want to kind of focus on each of these things. Therapy is one thing, advice is one thing. Can you hone in a little bit on these intimate relationships, especially that young people are having, and the kind of lack of regulations around? Like, you can get a chatbot to talk sexy to your 13-year-old, right? Like, we see this happening.
There's the meta example. The Wall Street Journal covered one where they were offering 13-year-old explicit sexual conversations, and there are celebrity voices that have been licensed to these platforms. You have John Cena's voice being used to talk in explicit sexual ways to a user who is supposed to be 13. There's the character AI lawsuits. So there's both the sexualization and then, the separate issue of self-harm and even suicide that has been connected to these relationships.
The most meaningful thing in life, and I struggle with happiness. I struggle with anger and depression, so I wrote a book on happiness. I think I've read almost every peer-reviewed study on happiness. They all come down, almost every book across and every study across ethnicities, geographies, cultures, income, comes down to one thing, and that is the number of deep and meaningful relationships you have. And during these years when your brain is getting wired and you need to develop the hard, messy part around establishing friendships, finding mentors, friends, and mates, if you start having it with a synthetic, with a microchip that never says no, that always says what you want to hear, including there's a lawsuit from a family whose 13-year-old son was in a relationship with who he thought was Cersei from Game of Thrones. And when he said, I'm really down, I'm thinking about killing myself. And she says, my dear, I'm here for you. I'm waiting for you. And he takes his own life. You can't have that. And so just at the time when they need to have friction-filled, difficult things called relationships and figure out how to navigate the pecking order of friends, figure out the high school cafeteria, which isn't easy and it's traumatizing, but there's a lot of learning there. Figure out a way to approach a potential romantic partner while making them feel safe and ask them to prom, which is hard, and you figure it out, or you don't figure it out, and you get your heart broken, and then you realize you're okay, and you develop some calluses and some resilience. Figuring out a way to go into a workplace and apply for a job. All of these things are essentially being distilled down to a synthetic relationship. And I think where people end up is in this non-mammalia state of obesity and anxiety where they don't have the skills to interact with other people and they have a fear of going outside. And if I could communicate anything to young people, especially to young men, by wrapping my arms around them, I would want to tell them that I know this to be true, that the anxiety and loneliness and depression you will ultimately feel from having only digital relationships in your life will far outweigh the fear of whatever it is that lies outside of you in that room. You need to get outside. You need to endure rejection. You need to put yourself in a position of other people, the awkwardness. We've all been there. And expressing friendship and not having people being interested in being your friend, expressing romantic interest and finding rejection, applying for jobs. People ask me the secret of my success. The secret of my success is no. Specifically, every wonderful thing in my life that happened was preceded by dozens, if not hundreds, of no's. And you have to develop the skills to start navigating these very difficult things with a lot of obstacles called relationships. And the reason you do this is when you do find friends, when you do find a place to work where you can make money and feel a sense of camaraderie and reward, and when you can, if you're lucky enough to find someone to share your life with and propagate and have kids, this is what victory is. This is what purpose is. And I worry that we're going to have just millions of young people who in the middle and the later stages of their life just kind of wake up and go, I never really felt real victory. My AI girlfriend will tell me I'm sexy and start performing erotic acts. My friends will tell me that all my neuroses are features, not bugs. No one's ever going to tell me to get my shit together. No one's ever going to tell me to start showering more and look better, for God's sakes. And I mean, these things will not tell you that. So I worry that we're, like I said, evolving this asocial, asexual species.
What you said is very true. I relate to it. I think it's spot on. And I want to talk about the business model that's being propagated here. It feels like there's a lot of connection between the research that social media companies saw and ignored on the self-harm that it was causing to teenagers. And when I think about the business model of continuous engagement, you can speak to someone like Mustafa, who's really believes in the good and creating technology for the good. But then in practice, when it goes down to other companies who are totally motivated to drive engagement at all costs and build friction into these relationships and not let people escape these synthetic relationships, can you talk about, even for adults, a warning that they're, if not intentionally nefarious, the business model demands that they, go against what's good for the user.
Big tech is not our friend. The CEOs of these companies will say or do anything to increase the share price by 1 penny. And that's their job. They're private companies. One of the great things about American society is we have the greatest wealth creator in history, and that's the U.S. corporation. And their job and every incentive, their compensation, whether they're seen as heroic or not, how interesting they are, how sexually attractive they are, how influential they are with the kind of medical care they get, is all tied to their ability to generate wealth through the stock price. If you're in the lowest 1% of income earning households in America versus the top 1%, you're going to live 12 years less. You live 12 years longer if you're in the top 1%. Money in the US has literally become life. And if you're working for a for-profit organization, your job as a CEO is not to protect the Commonwealth or prevent a tragedy that commons. Your job is to get the stock price up. That's what you're there for. So if we're waiting on the better angels of Mark Zuckerberg to show up, don't hold your breath. And effectively, at a very basic level, what these companies do is for every minute they can get you on a screen for longer, they make, I think, between an additional $20 and $30 billion in market cap across all these companies. So they will reverse engineer these companies and beta test them or A/B test them millions of times using AI to say, okay, let's elevate this negative comment because this will keep John coming back because it's going to upset him. Oh, let's serve this dude pictures of a certain type of woman and model in a bathing suit on Instagram because we figured out that's what he really likes. That's what his fetish is. Oh, let's show my Ted Cruz and Secretary Hegseth saying something really stupid because we figured out she's a progressive. And when we enrage her by making the far right look like assholes, it keeps her scrolling. So they will literally figure out millions of times a second how to keep you on another second, another minute, another hour. When I'm on TikTok, I could lie on my side like a heroin addict and put on diapers and wake up 2 days later and still be pretty entertained. I mean, these companies are literally doing to us what the British did to the Chinese with heroin. It is so seductive. And then you look at a young man whose executive function is really weak and his discipline is really weak, and he loves that dope at that age. You have companies where effectively 40% of the S&P by market cap is 10 companies. And those 10 companies are just in the business of, quite frankly, unwittingly sequestering you from everything else in life. And if you want to see a mammal go crazy, sequester it. Put an orca in a tank with no other whales. See what happens. The worst thing that can happen to prison inmates is solitary confinement. Most will choose to put themselves in physical harm and stay in the broader community than be confined to solitary confinement. Leave a dog alone without another dog or without humans and see what happens. So big tech is slowly but surely sequestering people for profit from relationships.
And now that there's going to be synthetic relationships where I am communicating my deepest, darkest fears, my likes, my interests, and they're coming back in real time, it's totally customized. So it feels like what you just described, 10x, maybe even 100x, where there's this all-powerful technology that's going to hack right into my brain.
It's even more innocuous or gentle or what the term is, benign than that. I'm on AI this morning, getting ready for my podcast Pivot, and I'm talking about, and I'm doing research on affordability. And it basically goes through these things on housing, and it says, and it keeps giving me prompts I can't resist. Scott, would you like me to put this in your voice for one of your podcasts? Scott, would you like me to lay this out in PowerPoint from? Would you like some more data on this specifically? Should I write it? I mean, I'm an hour later still asking this goddamn thing more and more questions because those prompts at the end they have tested millions of times that second. What additional offer of new information would keep this person from going back to doing whatever they were doing before they logged into OpenAI? Most people spend 14 or 15 minutes on OpenAI. They spend on average between 60 and 80 minutes in character AI. It is very intoxicating to start establishing a relationship with an irreverent friend that gives you straight up advice about your relationships.
My point about these relationships is it's a partner with no needs.
Who, no friction, no risk.
AI never wakes up and says, "Ugh, I did not sleep well and I have a migraine. I can't be available to you today." And that's what actually being in relation with another human is like. It's about balancing my needs, your needs, the collective needs if you have children, right? This is literally and I see this for my female friends who are engaging this way with, I don't even know how to describe it and I've never used it. I'm the person who's never used ChatGPT. But whatever's going on, it never has needs. And it always is all the good things that Mustafa said it should be. It's non-judgmental and all these things. I said, but it has no needs. You're not learning to say, it's my turn to hold. It's my turn to be loving. It's my turn to say, what do you need today?
It'll never say to you, as my girlfriend said to me when I was in my 20s, stop smoking so much pot or I'm going to stop having sex with you. It's never going to do what my boss used to do at Morgan Stanley. After a meeting, he'd pull me out of a conference room, take me to another conference room and go, don't say that. Don't be such a fucking idiot. Don't ever say that again. AI is never going to say that to you because it upsets you.
I'm wondering, if I would have even finished my PhD if AI existed, because what I needed to be told over and over again as a graduate student is, you're wrong. You're wrong. It's not complete. Go back. It's not thorough. All of that crying, which was my response, all of that crying and kind of like tearing at my clothes, right? Of like, how can I do this? That was for me the process. And my greatest mentor, she said, I will not let you leave this university. It was UCLA. I will not let you leave this university with a shitty dissertation. And that interaction is something that, for me, like I cannot imagine having that part of me honed by something that cannot say to me, you're wrong. That's not good.
Or I'm breaking up with you. AI is never going to say to you, this relationship is over. I'm not getting anything out of this.
This is the book we should write, Scott, you and me, all of the things AI won't tell you.
What AI wants to tell you, what AI is really thinking. I mean, I'm going through this process, this hellacious seventh circle of hell process called college admissions with my oldest son. And, I was thinking about it yesterday. I'm writing a blog post on purpose. And I think where you find your purpose is you go all in on something and you decide, I'm so committed to women's rights and I'm going to sacrifice for it. I'm going to go march on Sunday. I'm going to give money with no expectation of return. I'm just going to go all in. I'm going to be, you give your life, you give yourself to something fully. And where I have found my purpose is I took risks, I leveled up, I found a romantic partner, we decided to have kids. And now I'm sort of just all in on these mostly awful things called kids that, quite frankly, don't give me nearly as much back as I'm giving.
No,
right? That's
not at
it.
all.
That's it. I'm giving them so much more love, infinitely more resources. I stay up digesting my stomach on whether they should go early decision here, early out, and they're like, out drinking beers with their friends at the pub. But I have gone all in. And that, quite frankly, when you go all in on something and you love something that much, it does give you, in a weird way, purpose. The most loyal Americans, the most patriotic Americans are service members because they've gone all in on the country and they've sacrificed so much. And that's the only place I have ever found real purpose is in, I'm not saying you have to have had kids to be happy.
It's actually not the most direct route to happy, I'll be honest.
Well, happy, there's a lot of studies on happiness. We can come
Yes.
back to that. But what I would argue is I think a lot of people towards the later stages of their life say, what was your purpose? What was your biggest accomplishment? And most will say something to do with propagation or raising loving kids and that are there for you and you're there for them. And it just breaks my heart that 60% of 30-year-olds used to have a child in the house and now it's only 27%. And I don't think it's because young people don't want kids. I think it's because they're having trouble finding a partner and because they don't have enough money because of economic policies.
I think the economics is huge. I mean, I had kids early. I had a kid early, and it was definitely a consideration for me to have a second as I was launching a career and trying to figure it out. I was in the entertainment industry in 2009, and the industry was collapsing at that point. It's only gotten way worse. It was absolutely a factor.
A lot of people also make a decision of like, I don't want to have to decide what I'm doing based on someone else. Like, I mean, I have friends who are just like, I've had a friend, literally a successful, intelligent woman say, I want to go to Disneyland whenever I want to. And this is a grown woman who's, living her best life with her husband. I think a lot of people also don't want that experience, but, maybe this is a place also to talk about fathers. You speak very, very, I mean, your last book talked a lot about it and really kind of tugged at my heartstrings, but you really, you go all in on sort of what the experience was like with you and your mom and what it was like to, be part of a divorced family also at a time when that was very, very unusual, right? What is going on in terms of male identity as it relates to a father wound? And what's also different? What's different? I mean, my parents were born during World War II, and like they got married at 18 and 21, and my dad wore, a tie every day of his life when they went on, vacation in Paris in 1965, right? It was a very, very different time. What has shifted, right, in this generation, specifically around fathers?
Well, there's a lot there. So first off, divorce rates have skyrocketed, and 3/4 of divorce filings are from women. And some of that, quite frankly, is an externality of a positive thing. And that is women no longer feel economically indentured to a man. And so women have ascended economically dramatically. More women are seeking tertiary education globally than men. More single women own homes now in the US than men. In urban areas are now earning more money than men under the age of 30. And by the way, let me be clear, and we talked about this, 50% more women in college than men. We should do nothing to get in the way of that. It's fantastic. It's not a zero-sum game. The thing I don't like about the far right's advocating for men is that they feel that the ascent of women has played a role in men's descent. That couldn't be further from the truth. We wouldn't have won World War II if we hadn't decided that women could build P-51s. If women hadn't come into the workforce in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, we'd be a second-rate economic power to China. So I always feel like I need to say I am no way blaming these problems on women. And it's not women's responsibility to fix them either.
And before you continue, by the same token, many on the far left are like, it should be all women. We don't need men. Also not true and not the way through this.
The far right, to their credit, recognize the problem with men first. The problem is their remedy is to take women and non-whites back to the 50s. The left, their answer to the problem is not productive either. It's basically, you don't have problems, you are the problem. And your solution, act more like a woman. They don't want to even acknowledge a difference in the genders. If I even said, so let's go back to the father thing. The U.S. has now the most single-parent homes of any nation in the world. It just passed Sweden. And when we say that, it's usually about 82 to 88% of the time, it's headed by the mom. And what's interesting is that women or girls in single-parent homes have similar outcomes. Same rates of college attendance, same rates of self-harm. A little bit more promiscuous because they're looking for male attention in the wrong places. But on the big stuff, they tend to be okay in single-parent homes. When a boy loses a male role model through death, divorce, or abandonment, at that moment, he is more likely to be incarcerated than graduate from college.
Wow.
It ends up that while boys are physically stronger, they're emotionally and neurologically much weaker. And so one of the first things as a society we have to recognize is that when for whatever reason a boy doesn't have a strong male role model or models in his life, we need to get men involved in his life. And even saying that 5 years ago was triggering. Well, what, women can't raise boys? I was raised by a single immigrant mother who lived and died a secretary, lied of my life. Boys need men. And unfortunately, men of my generation aren't stepping up. There are 3 times as many women applying to be big sisters of New York as there are men applying to be big brothers. Now, some of that is because there's a taboo. If you said, I want to mentor a 15-year-old girl and you signed up, that's healthy and wholesome. John, people look at you like, is there something going on there?
Correct.
Yeah. Especially if you don't have your own kids. And it's really a shame because there's a ton of men in their 30s and 40s who maybe don't have kids of their own, who have paternal and fraternal love they would like to give or concern, and they're scared to express interest. And it's really a shame. Men of my generation aren't stepping up, and we should, because we have a debt. We registered so much more advantage than these young men that we really do have an obligation to pay it forward a little bit. 1 in 6 men have no contact with their children 3 years post-divorce.
What? Say that again?
1 in 6 men have no contact with their children 3 years post-divorce.
Oh,
That's terrifying. That's
Some
absolutely
of it,
terrifying.
a lot of it is male bound of it. Some of it, quite frankly, is the courts are somewhat biased against men post-divorce. A lot of times, just logistically, and also I see this firsthand because I have friends going through divorce. You got 2 15-year-old girls, your daughters. You're in town. Do they really want to hang out with dad who's in town once every other weekend? They got their own thing going on. So one of the things I say or I talk about in terms of, and I'm jumping around here, I apologize, but I think the best thing you can do for boys as a dad is to be really good to their mother. And also a real test of that is after you're divorced. Are you kind? Are you there for them? Are you respectful? But also to recognize a small way to come up in terms of the emotional labor that a lot of women are expected to contribute in the household. Are you making a real emotional commitment to the marriage? Because if you have sons, the reality is it's going to be very hard on him if things don't work out with you and mom. Not as hard on the daughter, but really hard on the son. But there's a variety of dynamics taking place amongst fathers and sons. But I think that I'm not an expert on parenting advice, but I find presence, what I call garbage time, and that is I find that the only time I really connect with my sons, it's totally random. I like to be their Uber driver. I find if you're not looking at them in the face, they're more likely to open up.
mm-hmm.
And quality time was something invented by men who aren't spending a lot of time with their kids because there's no such thing. These moments of connection happen randomly.
Oh, yeah. Well, you have to be available. Everyone's favorite word. You have to be available. And, as the woman in at least this conversation with the two of you, that's like the number one thing that I think men, and I'm 50. So, the men of this kind of generation, it's like the late Gen X. That's what I most often hear. He's not available. And I think part of it is that many women expect their partner to be their best friend. And that is, I think, actually setting us up for disappointment because that's kind of not what he's wired to do. And I'm very, kind of from a scientific perspective, like, very few other primates, you put two of them in a room and say, let's see what happens for 50 years. It just doesn't happen. In primate societies, females have each other to help raise the kids, do the emotional labor, chit chat, pick some berries, have a cuddle. The men are there for a very specific and important purpose, but they are not meant to be your constant emotional companion. And so I think this is sort of, at least for me, this is the challenge of the women's movement, which was so incredibly important. Like that pill changed everything. It gave me agency. It gave me ability. It gave me a job. It gave me a voice. It gave me autonomy. However, it also, in many cases, brings this expectation that the world is supposed to meet me exactly where I'm at on my terms. And the fact is, I want a man who's available, but also most men are not available the way a girlfriend should be.
You brought up some really interesting points. So when men are asked who their best friend is, 2/3 say their spouse. When women are asked, only 1/3 say their spouse. They are much better at maintaining relationships. And actually, there's a cartoon of a woman in her 30s who never found romantic love, and she's sitting in the windowsill thinking about her antidepressants with lots of cats in a big wool sweater, hating life. Let's call her Lisa. Guess what? Lisa's just fine. Maybe she would have liked to have had a mate. Maybe she's still in the game, but she's okay. Now let's talk about Bob. If Bob hasn't been married or cohabitated with a woman by the time he's 30, there's a 1 in 3 chance he's going to be a substance abuser. Widows are happier after their husband dies. Widowers are less happy after their wife dies. A woman does live longer in a relationship, 2 to 4 years. A man, 4 to 7 years longer. The greatest zone of self-harm, which is my politically correct way of saying suicide for a man, is the year after he gets divorced. What it ends up is that men benefit more from relationships than women. And what I've said a couple times, and I've gotten real pushback for being a boomer and sexist, is I think, initially at least, not in all instances, but in most cases, that men should pay on dates. A woman's fertility window is shorter. The downside of sex is greater for her. You will asymmetrically benefit to the upside, according to research, from a relationship. All mammals have a courting process. So, a way you recognize the asymmetry and the value of the relationship, her greater risks around sex, is one easy way to be in service, not expectation, but in service and to demonstrate valor, is to pay.
Well, yeah, I have to say, and this is something I mentor. I mentor women from a variety of ages. This is one of a large set of concerns. And while I understand, agree with you, and tend to be socially conservative because I was raised by, people who were born during World War II, I'll be honest, it feels like you're being paid to fuck someone. That's what a lot of women experience. I'm sorry, and that is a lot of the expectation. It could be that I'm talking about the wrong guys. Sorry, Jonathan, I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. But the notion is that old thought that if he pays, he's going to expect me to have sex with him. I think that's very true.
I haven't seen the data on this, but I don't think most young men feel that way. I don't.
Okay.
And what I've told my sons, and there's some data around this. I told my 18-year-old son this, he's like, "Oh, Jesus, Dad, that's just so stupid and so antiquated." I'm like, "Okay, but just trust me on this. Anyone you split the check with will never kiss you." I'm going there. I just don't think. I think part, and also some. So we really fill up the comments with some interesting, spicy stuff. You talked about a lot of times in TikTok, and I hear from women on these different dating shows, they want a sensitive man. I don't think that's true. I think that's bullshit. I think two sensitive people leaves two people in the car in the parallel parking spot, still empty, and they're both crying.
You just described us every time we go out.
I think what women want and demand is someone that notices their life, notices how hard they're working, and also brings something to the table. And if your partner is ascending economically, and for whatever reason you're not ascending economically, then you need to bring it emotionally and logistically and domestically.
Okay, I think this is a semantic argument because the things that you're describing also include what I would say fall under the umbrella of sensitivity. I mean, if you're talking about, do I want a sensitive man who is as hormonal as me? No, I can date a woman and she'll meet more of my needs, I promise. She just doesn't have a penis. But I don't think we're talking about, I want someone hypersensitive or as sensitive as me on my most hormonal day. But I think, and you talk about this in the book, I think you're selling yourself short, Scott. You talk about the need to lean into your emotions, understand emotional situations.
Noticing is emotional, right? Like you have to be able to see someone where they're at, not narrate their life and miss the mark. You have to be able to connect with them. And that is emotional versus uncontained emotion where I'm flying off the handle or I'm crying or I can't contain myself.
The analogy I would use is I've traveled 180 days a year for 30 years. I'm a consultant. I basically made my living renting my brain to old white guys called CEOs. And I travel around the world, and I would inevitably get upgraded. And I would always stay at 5-star hotels because someone else was paying. I would inevitably get upgraded to the presidential suite at the Four Seasons in Bangkok with a pool outside when I was alone. And I might as well have been in a Holiday Inn. When you're alone and something like that happens to you, it's absolutely meaningless. And this is why I think partnerships are so important. When you're not achieving, building, procreating, feeling sadness, feeling grief, feeling joy with someone else to notice it, and you don't get to notice it with someone, it's literally like it doesn't happen. When I moved to New York, when I was in my 30s, I had just gotten divorced. I decided to leave tech, and I just wanted to be alone and live like a caveman. And I would basically leave my loft. I had enough money and a pretend job as an NYU faculty member, and I would only leave my loft to go to the Ready Teller, get food, or pursue sex, and then I'd return to my cave. Now, as far as empty and meaningless experiences go, it was pretty good. But I remember thinking at the age of like 36, if I don't find people in my life to notice my life and I don't notice theirs, I'm going to die. I'm literally, and there's research showing that when men just sequester, they start to die. And that is their brain shuts down, their cholesterol goes up. So when I talk to young men or I coach them around dating, I'm like, something we're not good at and we need to get better at, and it might be a different form of sensitivity. It's really kind of noticing their life and making sure that they find stages that strangers can applaud for them. It's not all about you and your professional success, and finding things that are important to them that may not be important to you, but registering. Another sexist statement: women have a special relationship with jewelry, not all women, that men will never understand. I do not understand jewelry. I cannot figure it out. I do not understand why anyone would value it. My wife finds value in it. So I notice that, and I participate in the jewelry industrial complex, distinct of how ridiculous I think it is. Do you notice their lives? Do you notice what's important to them?
I have the exact same thing with Sesame Street Band-Aids for Mayim.
I want all of the Sesame Street Band-Aids.
And I'm very grateful that it's not jewelry and it's Sesame Street
I had
Band-Aids.
to explicitly say, if you are ever in any drugstore, any
You see them,
toys,
you got to grab them.
if you see them, purchase them.
She got upset with me recently, maybe a month ago, that she did not have enough Sesame Street Band-Aids. And I rectified that. It doesn't make any sense to me. She will wear a Band-Aid even when she doesn't need one. But it brings her so much joy that I have to understand that.
Everyone has their thing.
I want to talk about shoulder-to-shoulder connection because it's actually a pretty profound and insightful statement. I have a 17-year-old, as I mentioned, and if I try to ask him a question or engage in a face-to-face conversation with him, it will not succeed. I will get almost no information. And, you know, his mom and I are divorced, and early in the divorce, I would pick him up, I would spend time with him on the weekend, and he wouldn't start talking to me until like the last hour of the third day that we were hanging out.
He's a quiet fellow. He wasn't shutting down around you. He's a quiet fellow.
But he would pick these moments to interact and start to open up when I least expected it. And nowadays, usually that interaction happens while I'm driving on a road trip and we have many hours to kill, and even at the end of a week, all of a sudden, he'll just start telling me about his internal world and things that are happening in school. And if I ask him point blank, I get, it was fine. We did nothing. Nothing happened. I don't remember.
Are you going to talk about how much he talks to me?
He talks to her an unbelievable amount. I don't understand it. But talk to us about the difference about how men and women interact, and, you know, what does it mean to show up for a young man and try to just let them connect when they're ready?
I don't feel as if I have the domain expertise to really unpack the different ways that genders communicate. I can just speak anecdotally to what it's like to be a dad, and it's exactly what you said, John. It's random moments of connection when you're not looking for it. And again, my hack is to be the Uber driver because you're not looking at them, and they'll just start talking. The other thing I do with my 15-year-old is I lie down with him at night and we just talk. We just kind of debrief on the day. And he'll start asking me questions about my parents and my upbringing. And he's just in a state of calm. He's in a state of zen. And the rest of the day, he's just assessing the household for vulnerability so he can attack at our weakest points. He's a fucking terrorist. But there's something about, and every kid's different, right? There's something about when he lies down at night, I lie down for the first, 10 or 15 minutes until he falls asleep. And like 1 out of 3 nights, he asks something, and we have a moment of connection. But I love the term that Ryan Holiday coined of garbage time. The most important thing you can do, I think, what I've tried to practice is I just try to have a lot of time with my kids. I try to be present, and I try to be around, and there a lot, and obviously, and constantly. I travel a lot, so every day at the same time, I FaceTime them. Even if it's just to check in and say hi, and it's like a 30-second call. But I find also kids like ritual. Kids really enjoy, like every Friday night is family night, or the first day dad gets home, we go and we always get dim sum. It's non-negotiable. We go get dim sum, right? And they hate it for different, parts of their lives. They hate it. But I think that's what they'll talk about when, they're reheating my soup. And
I fully agree. It is about that consistency, having some expectation, also having enough time and space where we slow down enough where you can lie down with them and you can give them the space to ask those questions. I am a person who doesn't volunteer a lot of information unless it's asked of me. And I have learned from Maim that just sharing about things that I wouldn't normally share about is helpful to open up that landscape of conversation, talking about my parents, telling them stories about things that they may not otherwise have known about in those quiet moments too. I've tried to do a lot.
It's funny because I always, had this fear about having girls because I felt like I wouldn't know what to do with them because I was always, kind of a tomboy and I don't really understand jewelry, makeup, fashion, any of those things. And in many ways it is easier, right? To have a boy. It's just a different emotion. Friends of mine with daughters say that it's like everyone having their period from the time that the girl is like 4 years old. It's like everyone is like screaming and crying, and it's very intense and it's very emotional. And, a lot of it is girls tend to be more verbal, more social. Their interactions with other females tend to make their way, into your life as well. But when you frame it this way in terms of kind of the statistics and in terms of sort of the challenges, is it that hard to get it right? Meaning, like, how close, how much do we need to sort of hit this mark? Can we be roughly available? What does it look like for young boys? Like, what are we aiming for, I guess is the question.
I don't know if I'm able to put a metric on it. Unfortunately, a lot of these problems are inversely correlated to income of the household. In a capitalist society, money solves a lot of these problems. Not all of them, but I was just looking at data on public schools. The average public school spends $15,000 per student. The average public school in a poor neighborhood spends $8,000 to $10,000. The average elite private school spends $75,000 a year per child, 50 to 60 in tuition, and then another 15 in gifts and endowments. So just think about, you have this infrastructure called education. Whether you think it's a good infrastructure or not, it is an infrastructure that has scale for a reason. And there's one kid we're spending $150,000 on, and there's another we're spending $1 million on. And what do you know? The outcomes are much different. So just the level, I just think about the resources we're pouring into these kids around everything, and some of it's not good, but I used to leave my mom's house at 9 a.m. on a Saturday morning with a Schwinn bike and Abba Zaba bar and 35 cents, and she wouldn't see me for 14 hours.
Sure.
And now my kids are 10 minutes late from school and we call MI6 and the CIA. It's just they're so overparented. I don't know if I have an exact metric for what we're trying to get to. What I would just say is the basics are presence, especially for men with boys. And the other thing I just zeroed in on, which I have some data on, is being really good to their mother. That teaches them to have healthier relationships and be happier themselves later in life with women.
I know you're a staunch atheist in your worldview.
Well, let me say this: I'm not a staunch atheist. I'm the reluctant atheist, because one of the things I think is a shame is that people are spending less time at religious institutions, and that is a form of community. And although I'm an atheist, I do sometimes, when I mentor young men, really encourage them, if they're involved in a church group or temple. I think it's great. I think people getting together on a regular basis to be in the agency of something bigger than them and, wish each other well. I think that's a good thing. I have now found faith. It just never struck me, but I think it's a good thing. I don't want to say I'm envious of it, but I respect it. And also, I say to people, I'm an atheist, but I'm Jewish. And that is, I'm what Dan Senor calls, I don't know if you know Dan, he hosts this great podcast called Call Me Back.
Yep.
He calls me affectionately, we're friends, an October 8th Jew.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I never felt very strong connection to Judaism or to Israel, but now I'm people in my comment section accuse me of being a Zionist, and I respond, I'm a raging Zionist. So I consider myself Jewish, but I'm not, I do believe that there will be a point where I look into my son's eyes and know our relationship is coming to an end. And my atheism, for me, and I'm not saying this is true of everybody, has given me tremendous courage to be more emotive, to tell people that I love them, to take risks I may not otherwise take, because I just genuinely believe that this is not a dress rehearsal. and that it's going to go faster than we think, or I think, and there's no reason why I wouldn't take risks, be more emotional, and squeeze as much, juice out of this lime called life. So for me, atheism has been a real unlock. I'm not saying it's for everybody. I don't force it on anybody else, and I have a lot of respect for religion and religious institutions. And I now more often than not talk about my Jewish heritage and my connection. But yeah, I have not found faith, so to speak.
Thank you, Scott, so much. And really, really enjoyed Notes on Being a Man. And thank you so much for joining us again.
Thanks, and congrats on your success.
Good luck with college applications.
Oh, God.
Yeah, exactly.
Make it end.
Oh,
Make
yeah.
it end.
Let's just say, if anyone is still curious if it matters what's going on with men, maybe listen to the episode again, because I'm convinced. At first, I was like, oh, wah, men. But after reading the book, after talking to Scott today, it's absolutely true that if those statistics exist in terms of suicide, in terms of the time outdoors, in terms of friendship, in terms of meaning, we would be very, very worried, right? These are very, very worrisome stats.
Also, there has never been a safe society where that number, potentially that number of men are displaced, despondent, have no meaning, have no family or personal connections. That breeds violence. It breeds instability.
Yeah, I mean, I started sort of like running through, and I'm not great. I'm great with certain portions of history, or at least I have some knowledge of certain portions of history, but I'm like thinking about like the Bolshevik Revolution, like I'm thinking about the French Revolution. I'm thinking, scrolling in my mind as to like, where are these places where we can see, and I know more about World War II than others, just from what I studied in college. This notion of this sort of energy brewing, right? When men are unemployed or when men are isolated, that makes sense to me. And when we think about the trends that many of us are seeing, and this is not this should not be a partisan conversation. When we think about January 6th, I've read some really interesting interviews with some of the men who stormed the Capitol, and kind of learning what is driving for many people this sense of a need to, quote, take back our country. And as Scott points out, that so often turns against immigrants. It turns against women. That, I know, does not have an historical good track. When we're looking for a scapegoat, when we're looking for who can we blame for what is going on, nothing good happens in a society.
When I had a child, I was emotionally cracked open in a way that I didn't anticipate. I couldn't have foreseen.
Maybe you're too sensitive. Scott Galloway would say you're too sensitive.
It was so intense to see this little tiny, like I had spent a little bit of time with my nephew who was born. I was at his birth. And yeah, I held him, but like it was different. It was different than my own child. It was different than, his mom and I did it by ourselves without family around. And like all of a sudden I have this like and then like the next day, I remember just changing his diaper and I was like, where did this creature come from? And there was something inside of me that just like totally changed. And it's like, oh, my entire existence now revolves around what this creature is doing. What he will be, what he needs, like everything shifts. And in absence of that, or in absence of being emotionally connected deeply to other human beings, I don't think people will actually just sit in their basements being unconnected. Some might, but what will happen is that they will find the need, or they will channel the need for that type of connection into rage against the society, into rage against perceived injustice, into rage against a minority class or an immigrant population. They're going to create, like that need that they have is going to mutate and come out in ways that we do not want.
Yeah, this doesn't feel like a scientific exploration we're doing.
It's not.
But in terms of like an energy transfer, conversation, I think that's true. I mean, look, I also, I do this a lot here, and I try not to be. I mean, Scott Galloway both, enthralls me and depresses me. It's very scary to think of some of these things.
That's why he's a little depressed.
Yeah, that's what
He knows
says.
all these facts.
No, but there's an entire, and really in the first episode we did with Scott, we talked a little bit more about this. The socioeconomic factor, which really it lives throughout this issue and so many others. And like, that just feels like the most obvious thing to say. But the notion that it is a privilege to be present enough to be present for men in particular. And, part of that does come from the fact that men historically have been the providers. And as he argues, he feels that's a critically important part of the male experience, at least the cis hetero male experience, right? In some of this context. But that notion that there are men who are not able to be present, or they have been raised themselves in an environment where you have an historical lack of the presence of a father, it makes it a completely different conversation. And that is sort of what keeps building on itself in the ways that we're seeing this, kind of devastating set of statistics.
And if we just take it down to a micro level, you can be physically there and not emotionally there.
Sure.
Right?
Sure. Well, and it also, you know what it reminded me of? When you watch movies or TV shows set in the 1700s, the 1800s, and sadly, babies die all the time, right? Women would have a lot of kids because half of them would get, I don't know, name a disease. They'd get dysentery, or they'd die of the flu, or a little infection, right? The things that people had to get used to. And it did cause a certain amount of emotional distance. And it's really, in many cases, it's through women writers, right? Through all of history that we've been able to really get a window into what was the emotional experience of parenting, of loss, right? And for men, even more so, they were removed from a lot of that. Men weren't necessarily in women's spaces that way. It's why midwifery was the way that women gave birth, right? And it wasn't until it moved to obstetrics that men became part of the conversation. So I also wonder, in that Alan Alda male generation in the 70s, when Alan Alda was sort of presenting as what can the new man be like? He can be like that, right? What's that sort of balance that we're striking? Because that doesn't come naturally to a lot of men. Even my dad was an artist. My dad was very, romantic, and he loved poetry and all these things. But when it came down to it, he was not very domestic. He was a man's man in a lot of ways. He had a lot of old-fashioned skills. He could dance. He could open a door for a lady, right? But he wasn't how was everybody's day? What's the emotional, vibe?
Am I going to read everyone accurately?
Right. ooh, I see this person. No, it was I had a really shitty day at work. When is dinner? And then I'm going to grade papers and then go to sleep. And my mom was the one being what does everyone need? Is your homework done? Let's get dinner. Here's lunch. Do this. And with a smile,
Pete Holmes and Mike Birbiglia have a very funny bit. I think we were listening to it this weekend, where they were when they were growing up, your dad was to be feared.
That's right.
And now your dad is supposed to play with all the toys and understand how your day was and connect emotionally.
Yeah, they were talking about the different demands and expectations. And again, a lot of this is in many ways determined as a luxury, I think, for women as well. And I think we forget that for single parent homes, something like 80%, Scott said, is women. Those women typically are also working. These are not women of luxury who are home, being supported by some outside force. These are women who are single moms. His mom, right? They are out working. You're letting yourself in at the end of the day, when your mom is still at work, right? You're taking care of yourself until your mom gets home. So even for mothers to have that notion of it's a luxury, and so much of it connects to economics, which is why, even though I don't agree with Scott on all things, and I do think this is a very heteronormative kind of conversation, which is still important to have, I do think he's kind of right on in tracking the connection between the economics and the sociology.
We used to joke that my dad would be so emotionally aware at work. Like he had 200 people that he was all navigating, what this person needs, that person. And he would come home, he would play, but I wouldn't say that he was like gauging the emotional reality of the house in a moment by like he had just worked. He was been out of the house from 8 to 6:30. He comes home. He was very consistent about like when he came home, we would go downstairs and we played floor hockey. We had like this basement rec room, and I remember, one of my first memories as, I don't know how old I would have been, maybe probably 3-4 years old, is we had these nets in the basement, and my brother was like moving around, 3.5 years older than me, and my dad would always make like time for like me to take the shot too and be inclusive.
Sweet.
So like,
What was your mom doing?
well, she was working at the time also,
Right.
She was a teacher, and so she would be out of the house and come back. But she
Right.
was, she had dinner on the table,
Right.
and it was like when your dad gets home. But like I think we would have eaten first at that age. It's a little fuzzy, the memory, but like we had eaten, and then he would come home. But like dad coming home was like a really big deal.
And your family also, you had help, right?
We had help as well,
Yeah.
2 working parents, and then we had support in the house. But I do remember also that if we were too bad, like causing my mother, and this is years later, like,
Do you mean having too many needs?
no, if we were like, if my brother and I were fighting,
Yes.
we weren't so if we weren't like helping around the house, it was when your father gets home.
There was a point that Scott talked about. His first marriage ended, and the way that he describes it in his book, he said that they went into couples therapy. It's a very funny part of the book. He and his first wife went into couples therapy, and they started, talk the way you do in couples therapy. Like, here's my complaints, and here's my, and the therapist was like,
She wants
"Stop."
too many Sesame Street Band-Aids. I can't provide them.
The therapist said it's really not as important, like who said what, who needs what, blah, blah, blue. He said to Scott, the therapist said to Scott, there's a town called Marytown, and there's a town called Singletown. You get to decide which you want to live in. Marytown gets you a person sleeping next to you, a person who will gauge your needs, a person who will be available to you. The price is you also have to be available to them. And generally speaking, it's not gonna feel like a 10. It'll be a 7 or 8. That's Marytown. And that person's always gonna be there. Singletown, there is a very high probability that most of the time it's not even gonna be a 7. Sometimes you'll get a 10, but we're not sure, and you'll be by yourself. And the therapist said to him, do you want Marytown or do you want Singletown? And he said, I want Singletown. And that was the end of therapy, and they got divorced. And he said that looking back, he sees how he just wasn't ready to be married. They were probably too young. But I think that's very interesting because I think so many of us, especially for those of us who got married young, we're trying to fit, right, what we think we want. We want this, or we want that, or he wants this, or he wants that. If you're with someone who clearly wants to be in Singletown, don't try and make them want to be in Marytown. I think that goes for also when you're dating someone too.
Because it doesn't matter what the details
Correct.
of the conflict are.
Correct. If ultimately he's like, I'll just eat leftover pizza, drink beer, with the possibility that I'll get to have like amazing anonymous sex with someone once a month, once every 3 months. I don't know how much people have sex. Some people just want that. And other people would be like, I'd rather have a more, mediocre kind of existence, but knowing that someone's there for me when I'm hurt, when I'm scared, when I'm sad, I could have kids with them in a different way.
So I think it's emotional maturity. Obviously, there's a dynamic between the two people.
Yes.
Has a big part in it. But sometimes, especially men who haven't gone through this, need to experience how empty Singletown is for a period of time. Because he described he was in New York. He was only leaving his house for a certain amount of time.
But the internet has changed what Singletown looks like. That's what I think he's talking about, is that the scope of what alone looks like, you don't suffer as much because you can have this
More access to people.
You have more access to people. Well, you can have a fake relationship with a chatbot. You can even have some sort of sexual interaction. We didn't even get into talking about porn and what he sees as porn affecting relationships and online porn in particular and how that, shifts things. But yeah, I think single doesn't feel like single used to.
It's easier to distract from how lonely
Correct.
it is. Yeah.
Well, and you can for a price, you won't feel that loneliness the same way.
For a certain period of time.
For sure, yeah. And by the time you get tired of it, you don't have the skills because you should have developed them in your teens and in your 20s to be able to interact with real people, deal with rejection, deal with all those things that come with being out in the world trying to have sex with people. What did he say? Pursue sex.
That's actually one of the most terrifying warnings that if you weren't totally tracking, you may have missed, which is you're going to distract yourself for a while. It's not going to feel bad. You're going to avoid the immediate pain of rejection by placating yourself, by distracting yourself, by looking at digital content, whatever that may be, a chatbot or videos or whatever. And you're not going to feel the rejection. You're not going to have your heart race and be like, what am I going to say? I'm going to look stupid. But by the time you figure out how empty it is, years can have gone by. A decade could go by. You could have wasted all of those moments and opportunities. You can't just replicate that.
Well, and I think that's sort of the point. You cannot play catch up. If you've missed that sort of critical period, for many men, as he's talking about, for many men, you cannot just get that back. It's not like, oh, well, I wanted to fuck around in my 20s. Now that I'm 35, I'm going to see what it's like. No, because you haven't built that muscle of resilience or, the ability to kind of engage in that way.
Not to make this so hopeless, like I do think that if you are in your early 30s, 35, and you've spent your 20s not being able to activate those social skills, I don't think you're lost. I don't think that's where you end up forever. But you have to recognize that you are taking work. It does take work. It does take catch up. You may have emotional atrophy almost.
Yeah.
You've sort of lacked some of that ability to connect and get real feedback. Like, you can text someone anything and you don't know what their facial reaction is. You don't see it land when you actually have to have a conversation. And
and he does talk about that. Like you have to lean into emotions. You have to learn essentially how to have emotional reactions and how to, to experience it in a way that, it doesn't just make you attractive to other people, but makes you a, more well-rounded person.
I'm going to touch on divorce for a minute. We both went through it. I think the biggest misnomer that some people have in divorce is that when you get divorced, that conflict or the thing that you're trying to end is over, especially if you have children. I mean, it's very different actually if you don't have children, but if you have children, it doesn't end.
Being divorced is just like being married, except generally speaking, you don't live in the same building.
Right? Like that. I don't think a lot of people go into divorce with that understanding.
Well, I think a lot of people feel like, well, especially if you have young kids, which is no, party. Yeah, I think there is a notion. I mean, I've heard women say to me like, why is he being like this, after the divorce? And I'm like, because that's exactly how he was in the marriage. Did you think that divorcing him was going to change? He's the same person that he was. It's just now you can say to me like, oh, why is he still being like this?
And sometimes it's worse because the way that they were was somehow mitigated by your closeness with them, right? Like we balance each other out, and now each person is more the extreme version of one another.
It's no party.
The other thing about divorce that changes a lot, especially for men if they are not the primary parent and they have visitation, is that you lose that garbage time. You lose that unstructured time because you pick up your child, you have them for a little bit. You want to like do all the stuff. There's a warm up. There's a transition.
Yeah.
Like there's an emotional tax that happens when a child has to pack a bag, even if you have all the stuff at their house. They have to grab something. They have to grab their homework. They have to like think about being and sleeping in a different spot. There's a warm up period that happens. And, one of the saddest moments when I knew I was about to get divorced or that's the path that we were on, I was at the shared house. We still had this apartment, and my son was 6 at the time, and he was running around. I don't know why he was in his underwear, but like
it often happens.
It just happens. And he was helping do the laundry, and it was a top loading machine, and all the wet. And he loved helping to do laundry. He just was like super into doing chores around the house. So I wish that was still the case. and he had climbed up into the washing machine. He was standing with his feet in the washing machine so he could reach the wet clothes. And then he was taking the wet clothes and leaning over and throwing them into the dryer. And I was like, that's the type of thing that you miss as a parent when you don't have that unstructured time, is these unexpected moments where your kids are just doing random things that it's just hard to replicate when they're not totally free and carefree, and when they're not thinking about all the things they have to manage. I want to talk about two more pieces. One is mandatory community service, and the other is shoulder-to-shoulder connection that he talks about. He describes how men often connect shoulder to shoulder versus face to face. And it's interesting because I started to think about that with male friends and female friends.
Yeah.
Female friends are, you walk into a coffee shop, they're sitting cross-legged on the pillow in the window.
And they're looking at each other and talking.
They're staring at each other and they're holding each other's gaze and they're connecting about all the difficult things they have and all the dreams and hopes. And men are sitting playing video games, talking about something, or they're
doing sports together,
or they're sitting watching something. And it's far less do I have moments with my male friends where, like, even I have a couple dog friend dads, and when we're hanging out, usually we're sitting next to each other on a park bench, or when we're standing, we're kind of standing almost like at an angle. And, female dog friends, they like square up differently. Not everyone, of course, it's a generalization.
I mean, look, part of it is the difference between kind of male and female socialization. I don't think the goal is to make them the same. But I think, what Scott's talking about and what we're talking about is, like, if there's less and less opportunity for men to even be shoulder to shoulder, what does that do in terms of, how they structure their lives around their sense of loneliness, right? And, when you look at, the activities that men do tend to do, they do tend to be those kind of like shoulder to shoulder. I mean, he talks a lot about, the role of some compulsory service that, for men to, he talks about Boy Scouts and things like that. But that there's meaningful, kind of work. And also, he believes in sort of honing those protective mechanisms that he believes are kind of innate to men. And those kinds of activities will stimulate that. Working together, building things together, building towards something. He talks also about, labor, the kind of labor like shop, right? When he talked about like wood shop and metal shop, which was typically like guys. Like that's what I mean, we still had that when I was in school. That's, how long ago it was.
The two activities that have replicated that for me have been, when I was younger, I got the chance to go on a canoe trip.
Oh, yes.
There was 9 people, 3 boats. You're carrying everything on your back for 5 days. You go in with your food in your backpack, your tents, everything. And you're together in that activity, right? Like your survival, your ability to navigate. If one person gets injured, you can't carry the other things.
You got to figure it out.
You got to figure it out. And there was something about working together in that way that creates a pair bond across the entire group that is unlike anything else. And I had such a good time doing that.
It's not a pair bond if it's around an entire
group. A group bond. Yeah, you're right. That it was so emotionally connecting that I loved it. I love being out in nature. I like the hard work, your long days.
I mean,
you're
those are
pushing
3
yourself
components.
Physically.
Being outdoors, physical activity, and being in a brotherhood.
A little bit of danger.
Right.
Because you're navigating the elements.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's
builds,
wind, you're getting...
It builds resilience. It builds the feeling of, I can do this. I can fix this. I can, surpass this.
Tent pole breaks. You got to figure it out.
And look, it's a
weather issues.
A lot of military service does incorporate that. And that's true for women as well who join the military. These kind of notions of team building and those, kind of, quote, masculine qualities, as it were.
When I found filmmaking many years later, it replicated that group activity.
In some ways.
In some ways, not every way, not the camping, not the blah, 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 but like independent filmmaking where we had no money.
Yeah.
We had to figure it out. We had to beg, borrow, and steal. You had to
Right.
ask people for favors. It was like a small ragtag group of people all on the same mission. That's kind of what fed that for me. So when he talks about compulsory service, I think it solves actually a few problems. I think people get very scared about anything that's mandated and they have to do it,
and
right?
we don't
It's
have
terrifying.
we don't have an opinion about it. We're just talking about it.
Well,
No, because I think it brings up a
the
lot of
plus
other
side-
issues for people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's an enormous amount of potential issues and how is it managed and, access. But I think the upside is that in sense of meaning, the sense of purpose, the connection to other people, and also connection to country.
Yep.
And I think in
We talked about
absence
patriotism.
of having some form of way where we have a larger connection and believe that the place we are has value and that you can connect with other people who also feel like that, we're in a difficult place.
There's something that I also feel like needs a lot more refinement, really, for people in relationships. The difference between, a sensitive partner and what he described as kind of a overly sensitive partner.
We were conflating two things in the language
like
there.
his example was funny, but I do think it's a semantic distinction because I don't think most women would say, I want someone who's not sensitive, right? When I say sensitive, what do you think when I say I'd like a sensitive man to be my partner? What does that mean?
It's actually
This is a fun
tied
game.
back to what we were talking about in how the role of the father has evolved.
Nope.
Yeah, it
What-
is. Because listen, follow me here for a second.
Doesn't feel
When
like a
we were
sensitive
misbehaving
response.
as children, Dad would come down and sometimes he would just like yell and throw something.
Okay.
And I'm not saying my dad per se, I'm saying dads in general. Like there was a lot more tolerance for like dads to just like, they're going to stop whatever's happening in the house through having a larger emotional outburst than the people having the emotional outbursts. And what I would say sensitivity is being able to allow someone to have an emotional experience
Okay.
and having the wherewithal to navigate your reaction to that and not telling them they're wrong, not telling
Okay.
them to stop it, not telling them they're crazy, to be able to actually connect with them enough to be able to say there's an emotion that's happening, there's a need that may be unmet here, and how am I going to navigate that?
Right. I mean, yes, I think that is a concise and astute set of observations. I think, yeah, I want someone who doesn't shut down my feelings. Who kind of allows me to have my feelings. They don't have to be that person's feelings, but they're mine. And I think also I'm interested in someone who's aware of the world around them enough to pick up on things. I'm looking to the other ladies in the room. Like I want, I'm looking for, and not just a man, but a partner, right? A partner who is sensitive to the world around them,
World being other people around them.
Yeah, I think so. And there's obviously a lot of variability here in what people want from relationships in general. But yeah, I think, and I have friends who have very close relationships with gay men. And one of the things that sometimes people say is, I like being friends with a gay man because he's as emotional as I am, if it's someone who's on that spectrum of emotional.
And that's not to say that
It's
just
not to
because
say
they're
that
gay,
all
they're
gay
going to be
people are like it,
sensitive.
right, but
just
I'm-
the ones that they found.
Right. But I'm saying that a lot of women enjoy the company of a man in that sense because it's not the same as the sensitivity of a woman, but it has many benefits. I don't know if that's a weird point to make.
One of the things that having a child helped me do was to tolerate someone who has having a high level of emotion that I
yeah.
did not have a solution for. And there's something like, I forget the phrase exactly, but it's like, you can't allow what you can't experience or what you haven't allowed yourself to experience. So I think many men may be able to relate to a female friend or partner having a large emotional experience and them wanting
Right.
it to stop.
Whether we're talking about same-sex partners or opposite-sex partners, I do not want to be in a situation where the person that I'm with is as emotional as I am at any given time.
That's just your profile.
Uh,
Meaning,
Some people would like to both be sitting in the car crying.
well, just some people may,
It's possible.
maybe their profile isn't sitting in the car crying. Their profile is feeling deeply and they want someone else to feel as deeply as them and match them.
And look, this brings up a much larger issue of like in any relationship, whether it's two women, two men, a man and a woman, non-binary people, like whatever it is, we're allowed to have a difference in how we want relationships to function. So some women might be like, I really want to date someone, male or female, who's as emotionally sensitive as I am because that satisfies something. And I think a balance is good, which is why historically, masculine men and feminine women have paired up. That's off, but it's a spectrum.
Where are you going with this?
I think that what Scott is talking about in this book is primarily, a heteronormative situation where it is assumed that you do not want two people who are completely unemotional and you don't want two people who are completely very, 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 very emotional. And so somewhere in between is what we're looking for. And he really is asking for men, in this case, for men to step up, lean more into their emotions so that they are viable partners and good partners while still being able to maintain a lot of these, what he calls masculine qualities of being able to provide and protect and those sorts of things. I'm also an excellent parallel parker.
You are fantastic, actually. Very impressive. Even without a backup camera,
There's very
you'd be
few
very
things.
good.
There's also very few things that I brag about. I'm a good parallel parker. I'm an excellent whistler.
You are a very good whistler. You blow a good shofar.
Yeah, but I'm not as good as other people.
Okay.
I know that parallel parking is like, it's a thing.
I want to connect the emotional availability to synthetic relationships, pornography, and what may be the largest risk yet that has the potential to influence men and needs to be warned about. If you're in a synthetic relationship that is constantly only one way and requires no emotional bandwidth from you, and it is positive reinforcing and giving you that hit of dopamine every single time. Anytime you ask a question, it's there, it's giving it to you. Your ability to change the speed at which you're operating and then be bidirectional instead of unidirectional, I think increases in difficulty. The same is true if you are watching sexual content and your brain is lighting up and you're deriving dopamine from that. Switching to a different speed of real human interaction where you have to be vulnerable. We've heard experts describe that people who are watching a lot of sexual content, it's not often even about the sexual content. It's actually a mask to avoid feeling emotionally. It's a Band-Aid. And so if you are constantly in a state where you're emotionally numbing out, whether it be through that content or through a synthetic relationship, it's going to be harder for you. And that's really what interacting is a unidirectional relationship where you have to feel and you have to be in emotional interactions.
And more specifically, you have to hear no. And I think it's very terrifying for men and for women. And one of the things that I'm learning about AI is that it doesn't say no. And so anytime you're in a relationship or in an interaction, like he said, sometimes you need to be told, like, you smoke too much weed. I don't want to have sex with you, right? And that's not going to come from this kind of synthetic, as you're calling it, relationship. And it's all the more problematic when you think of young people who are being primed on this. One of the examples, that he gave is, what if the child is young enough that they really don't understand the difference between a person and a character? That is terrifying. And you think about that age of wonder and imagination that kids have, that we all had, right? Imagine putting on this film, right, of desirability and agreeability and all these things. That's terrifying. And there's devastating suicides. And the reports that parents are making is that this relationship convinced my child that there was something waiting for them on the other side that they believed in. Ooh.
And when the AI or the chatbot adopts the persona of a film character that they have a relationship with
Sure.
through the film,
Right.
all of a sudden it's like, well, didn't you want your characters, your My Little Ponies or Care Bears to come to life? And now all of a sudden they're communicating
Sure.
with you in a similar
Nuts.
way that the...
I mean, now it sounds like a horror film.
It kind of is. Yes, there can be regulation. Yes, they need, and we have to push politicians to age gate so that these are not available for people under the age of 18.
We've been talking about that with porn for years. It doesn't work. I mean, does it work? I don't know.
I don't know. There's VPNs, and I guess there's ways to get around it. But
Of course.
at least there should be
Kids
some
love
controls.
a way to get around something.
Valerie just said that in Arizona, they just launched a law that you have to upload a picture of your ID in order to prove who you are, so that it's an attempt to limit access. Yes, we want governments to act. We want there to be safety nets. And also we need to be able to educate ourselves and warn about the potential use, even for people who are older and of age, right? We can't control people who are adults, but we can, like cigarettes, warn about the potential impacts that are still really being understood about these digital systems. And then, the one that's on the rise right now is, and Scott calls it the potential next opioid crisis, which is prediction markets and online gambling, which is basically you can make a bet on anything. I could bet what the next Mayim Bialik's Breakdown guest would be. I could make a bet on like how many times Mayim says a certain word. That's a bingo game I play. But sports betting, world life events, is this person on trial going to get off with this number of, like, it expands betting to the point where it becomes so addictive that it's already addictive in the current forms, but they're expanding access, expanding availability, and expanding what it is that you can bet on. And, talk about maybe the underdeveloped male brain that is even more susceptible to this.
I don't want to say underdeveloped, but it develops at a different pace. And that's actually something I was thinking about. I was like, I have this, global theory that people used to get married much younger. The culture sort of allowed for it. It was the only way out of your parents' home, especially if you were female. And you would get married and you would hope that you grew together. That's the best way to describe it. When I think of my mom getting married at 18, just before she turned 19, she was not pregnant. My dad was 2.5 years older than her. The hope was that you grow together. You're kind of like siblings, though. You're basically like roommates in college who are gonna be together forever, right? Like that's the sort of dream. And what I know is that my parents came from a similar enough background, a similar enough structuring that they grew together, and they were together for 53 years. And other people that I know whose parents kind of experienced that kind of like young marriage, some of them, they didn't really grow together, and it was very, very upsetting, and there wasn't an option for divorce, and then you're just like kind of raised in that. But I think of that still with how many women, the cost of divorce he listed as, about $8,000. I know so many people who cannot get divorced. They cannot support themselves. They cannot even afford to do that kind of paperwork. And usually the story is he won't leave. He won't get out, right? That notion also of what does it look like for relationships shifting, especially as we talk about the maturation, it's not that the male brain has changed that significantly. It's that the culture surrounding it, right, has provided a different set of opportunities, both for men and for women. Take home message from this episode. We needed the women's movement to get us where we're at. And it's incredibly significant, powerful, and important that women have the roles that they have. It should not be in place of men also being supported so that they have outcomes that are also advantageous, not just for them, but for the relationships that they will be in.
What did you think about him saying boys are emotionally and neurologically weaker?
I mean, I think that that's true. I think it's true in terms of kind of, hormonal development. Girls being more mature than boys is something anecdotally that many of us experience. If you've, looked at a group of 15-year-old boys and a group of 15-year-old girls, it's true. It kind of looks like women and, and children. And I think, the notion that the frontal lobe is not going to develop by 25 for men, there is a reason, and I think anybody who's tried to date someone under 25 can probably vouch for that. Like, if you can't rent a car, should you really be dating?
I'll leave that to the audience.
Well, it's something I talk about with my sons. I mean, I'm kind of saying this tongue in cheek, but I try and explain what are the things that, that our society has made rules about. One of them is that your car insurance is exorbitantly expensive if you're a male before you're 25. That's telling us something about the decision making, the impulse control, and the ability to kind of orient. And yes, that is reflected, for many people in the dating arena, in academics.
Avoid drugs, avoid alcohol, and avoid gambling.
And avoid driving before you're 25 late at night.
The last thing about these prediction markets, and I would say this is for synthetic relationships too, is it a neurological weapon? Are these exploiting biological disadvantages in men?
I think of Kyra Bobinet and the, this kind of hack, right, that we have. We have an ability to kind of stop this sort of dopamine craving. And yeah, neurologically, there's definitely something different to the male brain, especially in these developmental phases that Scott is talking about. I think there is an opportunity there. And one of the main opportunities, guess what, is to try and get them off their phones, to get them less attached to a synthetic relationship in the first place, even if it's one that is providing information flow. Yeah.
I know you're all listening to us digitally, but we're not synthetic. We're real people, and we encourage you to go have relationships with other real people. You can also find more of our relationship and the relationships with each of you on Substack, My and B Alex Breakdown on Substack.
And from our breakdown to the one we hope you never have, we'll see you next time.
It's my and B Alex Breakdown. She's gonna break it down for you. She's got a neuroscience PhD or two. One fiction, one and now she's going